The Onion reported, in a slight shift from his campaign trail promise, President Barack Obama announced that his administration's message of change has been modified to the somewhat more restrained slogan, relatively minor readjustments in certain favorable policy areas. And I think that's something we've all been coming to recognize. Us, the people around us, the people we talk to about politics, something that we're recognizing, and also recognizing in a lot of ways that almost understates it, really. On a whole number of issues, seeing relatively minor readjustments would be better than what we're actually getting, right? Think of the list of things. Sherry Wolf talked about it last night, about the Defense of Marriage Act, the banning the federal government from recognizing the marriages of same-sex couples where they were legally performed. And faced with a challenge to DOMA, the Obama Justice Department sends what? A holdover from the Bush administration as a lawyer to go to court and argue that DOMA is just fine, thank you, even though Obama promised to overturn DOMA. And they didn't just argue it on the basis of a technicality. They argued, came in full bore to defend the constitutionality of the Defense of Marriage Act. And that's only 3 days after the administration did the same with the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Another anti-gay policy that Barack Obama promised to overturn as president. Another anti-gay policy that Barack Obama's lawyers defended as, quote, rationally related to the government's legitimate interest in military discipline and cohesion. I mean, the list goes on and on if you think about it. The military tribunals, the defense of torture. It's almost down the line on the positions of the Bush security state. Think about Afghanistan, Pakistan, Palestine. The Obama administration on another front even lined up with the coal companies in improving a bunch of permits to basically blow the tops off mountains in order to get at the coal with devastating consequences to the environment. And of course, looming above it all is the bailout, you know, of the Wall Street bailout. I don't know about other people, but it did take a while for it to sink in for me that no, it wasn't just that I didn't understand this especially complex maneuver that the Obama administration was carrying out, that it wasn't that, you know, there was something I couldn't quite understand, but no, they really were putting in place precisely the same policy as the Bush administration put in place, exactly as Henry Paulson drew it up with Ben Bernanke and, lo and behold, Tim Geithner. Right, as Joel Geyer pointed out at one point, the change that exists now is that Obama administration policy is being written by Ben Bernanke, Tim Geithner, and Larry Summers. That's the difference. And the lesson here, I think, is that even when faced with this catastrophic financial crisis, even handed a historic opportunity and vast support for fundamental change, this is an administration that reaches instinctively for the neoliberal, pro-free market, triangulated policies that it's most comfortable with. Now, that fact doesn't mean that we should expect the Obama administration to start descending into Bush administration territory in terms of their popularity. Certainly not as long as their opposition is the Republican Party as presently constituted. I mean, people talked about it last night, and it's just astonishing. You can't even, and just to try to choose the preposterous quotations from these people. One of my favorites is from John Boehner, the House Republican leader, who says, the stimulus, the budget, it's all one big down payment on a new American socialist experiment. Which makes me wonder when the old socialist experiment was in America. They're laying the groundwork, he says, for everything: expanded welfare, government-run health care, green jobs. They even want to pay your irresponsible neighbor's mortgage for them. Because, of course, only a communist revolutionary would want to stop foreclosures of people's homes or form green jobs. And actually, John Boehner is one of the more mild-mannered and less scary of the bunch of Republicans that are in there right now. The people who welcome the speech of the actor John Voight, a completely deranged address. And I'm not saying that as a term of abuse. I think it actually was clinically defined, deranged, to fight Barack Obama's attempt to turn the country to Marxism. So the truth is, as long as they're the opposition, it's going to be obvious why Obama and the Democrats can still have high popularity ratings. But it's a pretty small comfort, I think we all have to agree, that while the right wing is still in the ditch, the scale of the crisis and the urgency of the need for the change that the Obama administration campaign seemed to promise is still there. And that scale of the crisis is sometimes difficult to get your mind around, just what is happening in this society. It reminded me of something that Mike Davis wrote early on, where he made a comparison of like encountering and trying to understand the economic crisis we're facing now with the first U.S. Army surveyors when they encountered the Grand Canyon. And there was simply nothing in their experience to give them the words or the concepts to convey the vastness of what was taking place. And, you know, as a journalist, I thought, man, I wish I wrote that. That's a really good metaphor. But another side of me thought, well, maybe that's a little bit over the top, as Mike Davis is sometimes prone to. But the truth is that I keep coming back to that idea over and over again. I mean, Allison McKenna in Chicago was telling me about the cuts in the Illinois child welfare system that are being proposed, the very real threat that $460 million will be taken out of this program. Almost 1,200 layoffs in the state of Illinois, which amounts to 38% of the people who are employed and work for the Department of Children and Family Services in the state of Illinois. Right? An agency that's in charge of dealing with the most vulnerable in society, with the people with the most acute needs of all, being cut almost in half. It's hard to get your mind around what that actually is going to mean. And of course, we know that it isn't just in Illinois, that you could repeat this for every state that people are here from, and by every indicator nationally. You know, the latest statistics showing that wages in the first 3 months of this year were cut by American business by an average of 6.2%. The number of homes in foreclosure in May was up 18% from the year earlier. And that suffering stretches right around the world, with the World Bank further lowering its estimate on the world economy to a 3% decline this year, an almost unprecedented prediction. The most obscene part is not only that this crisis never had to be, you know, that Wall Street didn't have to be turned into a casino betting someone else's money or really everyone else's money on the housing bubble. Not only does it never have to happen, but it doesn't have to keep happening right now. Right? I mean, I had another Grand Canyon kind of moment when we were working on Socialist Worker and producing Adam Turrell's article on how the 0.0000003% lives. We could have called it the 10 richest Americans, but and when we worked it out, we know that New York City is suffering from an unprecedented budget shortfall, and the mayor, Michael Bloomberg, threatening to lay off 14,000 city workers, close firehouses, a whole set of things. And the truth is, when you work it out, Michael Bloomberg himself could cover the entire unprecedented deficit in the city budget for each and every year for the next 16 years. That's how much he's actually worth. And so, you know, you're told, the city unions are told that there's nothing that can be done, you know, that this is just the way it is. There's a crisis. It's like bad weather. It's just happening, and we all have to sacrifice. It drives you crazy because the first rule of these calls for sacrifice at all times is that they ignore the people who can afford to make the most sacrifices of all, like Michael Bloomberg or like Wall Street and the AIG executives who just couldn't bear to sacrifice their millions in bonuses even after the U.S. government had to step in to save them. That's the reality of the twisted society we live in, and there's something about that. There's something about those realities coming to the front and emerging in such a glaring way that there's a growing recognition and a growing anger about those things that is a change from the past and that is not going away, that is not turning back in any sort of way. The certainties about the superiority of the free market, that capitalism is the natural and only way to run society, all, you know, that the idea that if you work hard enough, all these ideas that were never fully true, certainly not for everybody, and not even for most people, and most times, you know, even in the best of times, those ideas are being exposed, and that's what's at the root of what people talked about last night, an ideological crisis that is as big as the economic crisis in many ways right now, with the poll that everyone's familiar with about capitalism and socialism, of 1/3 of people under 30 seeing socialism as a preferable alternative to capitalism. And in a lot of ways, that same sort of idea is what drove the vote for Barack Obama, a recognition of society going in the wrong way, and at last a feeling that something could be done to change that direction. And that, I think you have to summarize as a sign of people wanting to be idealistic. Right? And I don't mean idealism like the philosophy and, the idealism versus materialism. I mean the commonplace definition of people having ideals and hoping to see those ideas realized in the world. I think that's the meaning of the polls that, see an alternative to capitalism, or that it's a good thing that there's an African-American president, and diversity in government might be a good thing, or the shift in favor of same-sex marriage and extending to the election of Obama itself. We talked about this before and during the election, and it's worth maybe reiterating it now, of the group of people who became politicized around this election and who began to see themselves as organizers, and in this case, organizing a vote for Barack Obama, but nevertheless saw themselves as becoming political. And that's an important change that isn't going away. Now, idealism has a bad reputation, because if you're idealistic, that means you're not being realistic, which in the opinion of a lot of people is about the worst possible thing that you could be. For example, Barney Frank, the congressman from Massachusetts, who gave a commencement speech at American University in Washington, D.C. Now remember, this is a veteran, and certainly not the worst of the bunch in the Democratic Party. This is a veteran of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. Speaking a few months after the victory of the first African-American to become president in the history, where Democrats control Congress by the widest majorities in decades. And Barney Frank's message to the graduates of American University is, quote, "You will have to satisfy yourself with having made bad situations a little bit better." Now that is, some call to arms, isn't it? Workers of the world, you have a world that's just a teensy bit better, less bad, to win. Here's what Barney Frank has to say about idealism. Ideals that are not implemented do nothing but make you feel morally superior. They never fed a hungry kid. They never cleaned up a polluted river. They never built a road that got people anywhere. Idealism without pragmatism is just a way to flatter your ego. So there you have it, just a way to flatter your ego, I suppose, as opposed to the accomplishments of Barney Frank, who pragmatically engineered the giveaway of hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars to the banks, who pragmatically and realistically insisted that marriage equality had to wait, who idealistically, I guess, voted against funding the war on Afghanistan a month ago when it didn't matter, but when it did matter a week ago, changed his mind and became pragmatic and pragmatically voted for funding that war. I mean, based on the record of the past few months, Barney Frank has it completely upside down. It's not idealism that never fed a hungry kid. It's being pragmatic that steals money from hungry children and gives it away to the banks. Pragmatism not only doesn't clean up a polluted river, it fills it up with the debris of a mountaintop blown off to get at the coal. That's what pragmatism is about. And even more importantly, idealism is not only not flattering your ego, but the hope that something can be different, the determination to stand up for ideals, is the first ingredient in every social movement that we know of in this country and in history. If you were Rosa Parks in Montgomery, Alabama, and you were ordered to give up your bus seat to a white man, the most pragmatic thing to do would be to give it up. Because what are you going to do as one individual to stop Jim Crow segregation? What's the point of going to jail? Is it when realistically no one's going to stand up and protest with you? If you're an auto worker in Flint, Michigan in 1936, the pragmatic thing to do is to avoid all those unrealistic people who are asking you to join the union and making totally unrealistic plans to occupy a factory owned by the most important corporation in America that will surely the cops will stop. It was those movements of people acting unpragmatically and unrealistically who changed history because of their idealism and principle and their commitment that a society doesn't have to be this way. When you think about it, it's not really surprising that someone like Barney Frank and the Democrats who are like him, but whose entire worldview is straitjacketed by this idea of what's realistic, why they make a habit of concession and retreat in the period we're in right now. Because, for example, if you're going to stand up and defy the healthcare industry on healthcare reform at a time when the industry is spending millions of dollars on lobbying, paying millions to its public relations firms, all kinds of money to promote the myths and distortions and lies, to defy that isn't pragmatic at all. It's so much easier when you're motivated by pragmatism rather than principle to take the path of least resistance, to compromise, to retreat, to reach out to the other side, to see it from the point of view of industry. That's the path of least resistance because the pressure is only coming from one side. And there's only one answer to that for us. We have to make the path of least resistance the path of most resistance. It has to become the path of resistance of our side of struggle and mobilization. There is absolutely nothing inevitable, if there's any lesson of the last few months, nothing inevitable about winning change under the Democrats. But it is true that there are presidents and Congresses who are more susceptible to pressure because they owe their election to a base of voters, that's been the perception of what their campaign is about, and they need to maintain that conception because the scale of discontent is so high. But without the pressure, mobilized so that it's felt in Washington, and not only in Washington, but the corporate headquarters, in university administration buildings, in school board meetings, unless that pressure is felt, I mean, you know, there's no other way to say it, but without struggle, there is no progress. That's the fundamental point, and since I've been paraphrasing Frederick Douglass for the last, 15 or 20 minutes, I might as well give him some credit. Without struggle, there is no progress. You know, we know that we're coming out of a time when the bitterness with how society is organized is reached a new pitch. But that bitterness and anger hasn't yet been matched by struggle, except in a few cases. And it's also a time when the left organizations, whether they're liberal, progressive, revolutionary, socialist, the whole span of the broad left is emerging from a period of retreat. And so we see so much that's still tentative and conservative, especially the biggest of them, the unions, still stuck in the past. And there's simply no shortcut to overcoming this. What there is building the struggles that exist now and relating to the groups of people emerging who want to do something to change the world, no matter how small or medium-sized, and then they get small, and then they get medium-sized again. There's no way around it, because right now that's setting the stage for what's to come. I mean, one thing I know from working on socialistworker.org is, you know, you can get suckered into seeing what's happening only in terms of the narrow debate that's allowed in the mainstream media, and I think that's what a lot of people see. But we know from Socialist Worker that there are all kinds of struggles and politicization, radicalization that's happening outside of that, the struggles that break out. Like the UC Berkeley workers, fresh from a contract victory, who defended a fellow worker detained by ICE with the help of the UC Berkeley administration. Or the teachers in Los Angeles fighting a contract injunction that would have bankrupted the union if they'd gone out on a one-day strike. That's how seriously the threat of a one-day strike is taken in these times. Or the Stelladora strikers in New York. Or the activists in a town in New York or Florida who decide that they want to form a socialist group. We know that not all of these struggles are going to win, or that they're going to continue and, you know, form an organization and continue on a regular basis. They'll go up and they'll go down. But we do know that they all contribute to the building of the future struggles. That's the picture that's beneath what you see if you watch CNN, which I sincerely hope that you don't. But it's not always easy to understand how to relate to those opportunities, because it may or may not be the fact that starting to organize for the next picket or demonstration is the right thing to do at this particular time. It may be that the next thing to do is to raise a political debate or to broaden a political discussion in a movement, or to build a stronger and a more knowledgeable core of socialists, or really to try to do all of those things together but in different proportions and to get the balance right at any particular given point in time. And this isn't just a challenge for our organization. It's for the whole left in this country that's getting up out of bed after a long and difficult era. But it means the first step, as Sharon Smith said last night, is there's absolutely no excuse for anyone on that left to not be getting out of bed right now because the opportunities are so vast. But it also means that there's a lot to relearn. And there are going to be false steps as well as true ones. A lot of steps that won't get taken out of fear or a lack of preparation. But the point is that there is some course to be taken, and taken not taken right now, not tomorrow or next week or next month. I was struck in a socialist workers story about the sit-in that took place at the San Diego County building the day after California Supreme Court decided against Proposition 8. It was 60 people sitting in to demand marriage licenses in San Diego. And in between the chanting, the demonstrators spoke individually about what brought them together, but they also read from articles and essays from the ISR, for example. The most popular passage was from Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. This wait has almost always meant never. What we can see, whether it's the ongoing movement around marriage equality or in the victory of a struggle like Republic Windows and Doors that we saw on film last night, or on the streets of Iran today demanding that democracy means something, or in all the other struggles that go on in this country, what we can see is that there's more and more people who are tired of waiting, and that it's time for us to meet those people, to convince them of socialism and to be a part of a socialist alternative and the left in this country, and then to fight the struggles of today and to fight the struggles of the future. Thanks.